Hi, this is Kate Struck from Redstone PBS, and we've made this short video in the hope it will be of some use to people during this really difficult time. So the aim of this video is to give some specific strategies that might be helpful to staff members and carers at this time for people who are going to be struggling more so with changes in routine, changes in schedules, and familiar places being shut. So for many people we work with, familiarity and routines are something that gives them a lot of comfort and a lot of confidence in the world that can be quite unpredictable. So with those things not happening, people's anxiety levels are going to be higher than normal, and as a result they're going to be more vulnerable to presenting with behaviours that are harmful to themselves or harmful to others. So there are some key strategies that you might want to think about. So firstly, it's important that we divide the strategies into two main types, and it's important to do this so that you know what strategy to use when. So proactive strategies help to reduce the likelihood of behavioural challenge occurring because they're ensuring that we're meeting the person's needs, that we're creating and supporting a good quality of life, and as a result of that, the behavioural challenges don't occur. Reactive strategies are strategies that we use when the person is already becoming unsettled, and they help us to manage the risk when that person's behaviour has already become potentially dangerous for themselves or others. I'm going to go through these strategies in more detail, but first of all I want to give you some information that will help you to understand what strategy to use when. So this diagram looks at our arousal level, and it's relevant for everybody. This isn't just a specific diagram for people with disabilities or autistic people. So we all have a baseline level of arousal at which we feel comfortable but alert. If something results in a threat to us, our arousal will increase and we'll have a physiological response to that makes us get ready to act. If we don't resolve that, we can get to what is called a crisis phase, where we become very, very distressed or ready to fight. Now, once the threat is past, your arousal level will gradually return to normal. And what you'll notice is if you have reached sort of peak crisis, you'll feel quite tired and probably a little bit low in mood afterwards until your arousal level returns to normal. Now, it's also really important to say that although the person that you're supporting will go through these arousal level changes, you will also go through these arousal level changes, and it's important really to be mindful about where you are and how you look after yourself at the different points in this cycle really. So there are strategies we use at baseline, a different set of strategies we use during escalation, another set of strategies that we use during crisis phase, and yet another set of approaches and strategies we use when the person is in post-crisis. So linking back to the different categories of strategy, when the person's behaviour is at baseline, their arousal level is the normal arousal level for them, then that's when we use proactive strategies. When the person is becoming unsettled, we can use early stages of reactive strategies, and they're a very specific set of strategies that we'll go through. When the person reaches crisis, again, there is a specific set of strategies, mainly around managing risk. And we've also put in information around post-crisis. So there are things that you do need to do and things that you need to avoid when the person has just settled down from crisis that has happened for them. So let's look at proactive strategies first, and these are mainly aimed at maintaining the person's quality of life, because we know if we do that, and it's a key element of positive behaviour support, then people are less likely to become unsettled and present with behaviours that challenge, and of course they have a better quality of life, and that's one of the main things that we're aiming for. The first tip, however, is around helping the person to understand what's happening. So if you haven't done this already, the first tip really is around helping the person not necessarily to understand the complexities around coronavirus, but to understand what it means for them, and that the change is for everybody. Nobody's allowed to go to the cafe, nobody's allowed to go to the restaurant, and using a way that you know that that person will understand. So if that means using visual support, then use visual support. If the person can understand quite a lot of language, talk them through it, but also use the written word if that's relevant. Now, I've included some resources and some links here on this slide so you can have a look. We all know that when we're going through a period of stress or a stressful time, and somebody asks us to do something that we find a little bit difficult, our stress levels just shoot right up. And the same is relevant for the people that we work with, who we support. It may be that you think you're not really asking very much of somebody, but for them it may be a lot. And so where you can, reduce any kind of requests or demands that you think the person might find a little bit difficult down to a minimum. Obviously, you still need to ensure that people are looking after personal care and eating and drinking appropriately, and doing some form of activity so that they don't get bored. Now, this might seem pretty obvious, but sometimes we have to think and put ourselves in the person's shoes, really, to think, okay, what would this person find stressful? What historically have they found stressful? What do they sometimes able to cope with and sometimes not able to cope with? And it's really important to think we won't look at doing that because we know that could be a problem. Now, linked with reducing requests and demands and things that might be stressful, we also need to really be mindful about increasing high preference activities where we can do safely and it isn't sort of detrimental to the person in some other way. So where possible, increase high preference activities, do them a little bit more frequently, but don't do the same ones over and again. We need to make sure there's sort of variety in there. Schedules are really important for all of us. We all respond better if we've got a routine or something that's familiar, or we've broken our day up. So where possible, create an alternative schedule. So it may not be that you can't do the things that would normally be on the person's schedule. Create an alternative one. Split the day up. Make sure there's a variety of things happening. Linked with the last point, where you've got a schedule, try and make sure you communicate it to the person in the way that they can cope with. So if someone's used to having a whole day schedule, stick with a whole day. If it's half a day, go for half a day. A lot of people may be better with a now we're doing this and next we're doing that. And also make sure it's in the right format for the person. So if it needs to be very visual with no words on it, make it visual with no words. If it can be a written schedule, go for a written schedule. We're all finding that we're in closer contact with people that we live with, and we all need a little bit of space. Now, it's easier said than done in some settings, in some houses, but where you can, make a private, quiet space for somebody to go to, even if it's not a whole room, that they have got a place, a chair, a section that is just theirs, that nobody else uses, that they can go to and they can think, okay, I'm here, no one's going to bother me. So that's 7 tips on proactive strategies, and as you'll see when we go through the rest of the video, there are actually many more tips around reactive strategies. Now, that's not normally the emphasis we have within positive arousal support. The emphasis is always primarily on proactive, because we know over the long term that's going to reduce behaviour issues and it's going to increase quality of life for people. However, at the moment, we know that a lot of people will be just managing the situation, trying to keep things as settled as possible. So now is not the time to teach new skills or try and develop new opportunities, which is a big part of positive behaviour support. And we've more information on that on our website and other offers. So if you're interested in that, I suggest you have a look around. But for this video, we've put key proactive strategies in, and then there is quite an emphasis on reactive strategies. So I'm going to move on to the reactive strategies in the early stages. So as discussed, there are some specific things that it's appropriate to do at the early stages. When you notice somebody is becoming unsettled or stressed, and the signs for that person will be quite individualised for them, and if you know them really well, you'll have an idea of what those signs are, those early signs before things reach crisis point. So these are the strategies that you use at this point in the cycle. Looking back at the arousal cycle diagram that we showed before, it's that early stages point. When any of us feel under threat by something, our ability to listen to other people, to take on board what people are saying, really reduces down significantly. And so it's really important at this point not to say things or say too many things at once, or say things that are too complicated or can be more complicated than the person can cope with at that time. So keeping language as basic as possible is a good idea. What can be a trigger for people is asking for something and having that request refused. Now, obviously, there are things that none of us can have at the moment, but if it is something the person can have, even if it wasn't the time to have it, it's best to provide that for that person at the moment, because that will almost definitely result in a de-escalation of the person's agitation. Obviously, over the long term, this isn't a strategy you want to use, and this is where the proactive strategies come in place to kind of tackle these issues. But for the time being, it's safer to give the person what they're asking for if you can and if it's safe. At these early stages, it's sometimes easy to divert someone to a favourite activity to distract the person from whatever it is they're worried about or stressed about or unsettled about, or just if they're struggling with change. Diverting to a favourite activity gives you an opportunity to have lots of really high quality social contact with the person, and helps them take their mind off whatever it is that they are concerned about. I think we've all been in situations where we've had a degree of frustration and somebody around us has suddenly made some sort of joke that we actually find quite funny, and that relieves that tension and also creates a distraction. Obviously, you'll know what the people that you're caring for or supporting find funny. Use this really carefully. You have to know the person quite well, but it is possible that this in itself can divert and de-escalate somebody's agitation level quite successfully. Sometimes a person might be involved in doing an activity and just find it too hard, too stressful, and it will feel like a demand to them. It's useful to try and help that person to finish whatever it is, to stop that activity if you think it's making them stressed. It's also important during this phase really to not make additional requests or directions for that person. Now, this point links back to an earlier point where I said really be aware of your own arousal level, because when you know that the person you're supporting or caring for is becoming unsettled, you're also going to become unsettled. And it's easy for us to become a little bit panicky and for us to think, what can I say that will stop this? And sometimes people do use a threat of, if you do this, you're not going to be able to do that. However, that can often increase an agitation level, and it's something that we really discourage people doing. Not only because it increases arousal level, but you don't want to get into that kind of punishment approach. So I'm going to talk about the crisis phase and what you should and shouldn't do during that crisis phase in this next section. So just a quick reminder, this is where we are with that diagram in terms of the phases of agitation and crisis. The information now is going to be about what to do at this crisis phase. One key thing you really need to do when somebody's at a crisis is give them space, because at this point the person will very easily feel under threat by anyone coming too close to them, and this could result in injury to yourself or injury to the person. So it's a really good idea to give the person space. Obviously you need to be in the area somewhere, but not too close. If there's more than one person in the area, it's a really good idea for one person to take the lead in interacting with the person who's unsettled. That just reduces down the sort of group effect, reduces down different people saying different things. So this is something we highly recommend. One person leads the interactions, even though you're going to be keeping those verbal interactions at a minimum. It's really important that the person knows that you know they're not feeling quite themselves, that they are unsettled about something, but you don't need to say any more than that. I can see you're unhappy, and leave it at that. That helps them to kind of go, okay, they're not going to add additional demands or get me to do this or tell me to do that. It just gives that communication that you know where they are at, and you're giving them space, and you're not talking to them 20 to the dozen. Communication at this point needs to be really minimal. Like with the earlier strategy, people can't take on board what you're saying when they're becoming agitated, and when they're at crisis point, that pretty much goes out of the window completely. So often people think they can talk people down. Usually when people have reached a peak crisis point, you can't. The best thing to do is to not say too much. It's also really important to think about what your body language might be communicating. So think about how you're holding your hands and how to try and regulate your breathing and give a relaxed communication through your body language. Linked with the previous point, you don't want too many people in the area when somebody's unsettled. Now, you might not want to be on your own, you might want a second person, but you need everyone else to move out of the way. And if there are other vulnerable people in the area, then they need to be supported to move out of that area. Similarly, look around the environment and look at what actually could be harmful if thrown, and remove those things carefully, quietly, and as unobtrusively as possible. The person that you're caring for or supporting may be a really sweet, gentle, kind person, but when agitated, we are all capable of lashing out at other people, and that's why it's important to think about where you are in the room and what you can use as a barrier to move around away from the person. As well as thinking about barriers, it's also really important to think about where your exits are and make sure that you are closer to an exit than the other person, so that you can move right out of the room and give them further space if that's necessary. You might be trained in physical intervention techniques or you might not, but physical intervention really needs to be an absolute last resort to prevent serious injury, primarily because it is dangerous for you and for the person, and it's also possible that it'll increase the person's arousal level because they will feel under increased threat from you. So once the person's arousal level begins to calm down and de-escalate, they will go into what's called a post-crisis phase. And just going to cover a few basic strategies in that phase. So just looking at the arousal diagram again, this is the point at which your arousal level really will go below its normal level and you'll feel down, a little bit depressed maybe, and certainly very tired. Giving the person time is a key thing to do after crisis point. It takes at least 90 minutes for the person's arousal level really to calm back to baseline, and potentially a lot longer than that. So at this point, the person really just needs to calm and for you to be nearby. Well, it's really important to understand what caused the issue and the crisis so that you can avoid it again in the future. It's important that you don't talk about the issue with the person during the post-crisis phase, because it's likely to feel like a real demand. Potentially they're going to feel terrible. After they've calmed down, they're going to feel guilty if they've lashed out at somebody or broken something. So during the post-crisis phase, it's really important to give the person sort of quiet time and space and not to focus on the incident. This really links to the last point. Don't put any additional requests or demands on the person for at least 2 hours, and then only gradually start to get back to a normal routine. Using as few words as possible. Make sure the person knows you aren't cross with them or upset with them or angry with them, and that you're still okay with them and you've still got a good relationship with them. When the person's had a good bit of time to calm, you might think, okay, they're getting a little bit back to their normal selves. They might start talking to you a little bit more. And that's at that point, really, you could say, do you want to carry on with that activity we were doing, or do you want to start a new activity? And make it something that's not too demanding. Like I said at the beginning, this arousal cycle applies to you as well. You're sort of a little bit behind the person, so they'll be going up to crisis and you'll be an escalation point. And similarly, they may have gone through their post-crisis and you might just be going through yours, and it may be that you need someone else to swap in to support them with the activity if they're starting to move on, because you're going to have a dip, you're going to feel tired, and you're going to need, you know, half an hour at least, if not longer, for yourself, just to get yourself back to feeling okay. We've included this link to the video by Russ, who's done a lot of work on acceptance and commitment therapy. He's written The Happiness Trap, which is a really accessible book, which I highly recommend, around how to manage our own thoughts and feelings, particularly during stressful times, which is relevant currently for COVID, but also is relevant if you're supporting or caring for someone who can become unsettled and stressed on a sort of more frequent basis. So I highly recommend having a quick look at this video, which is a really great explainer video, and keep in mind that you also need to look after yourself. So just a quick reminder of what I said at the end of the proactive strategies section is that positive over support is around primarily increasing quality of life. We've focused a lot on reactive strategies in this video, really because we know that people will be not being able to access support as usual, that people might be experiencing more phases of people getting into crisis point, and we know that keeping people safe and managing risk is key at the moment, and perhaps less key is developing new skills and opportunities, which is a primary focus of positive behavioural support. I hope this video's been useful for people. I think if you're familiar with many of the tips, it's still good to review them. So if you're a staff team, you might want to review it together, or if you're a family, you might want to sit down together and have a look at it and have a discussion. And above all else, really, make sure you also look after yourself, because if you are getting stressed more so yourself, that means you're less likely to be able to support the person that you're caring for. Finally, stay safe, stay well. We can get through this.